If you enjoyed this interesting video, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us bring you even more exciting and thought-provoking content. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you never miss our latest uploads. Join our growing community today. Your feedback, comments, and ideas truly keep this channel alive.
Chapter 1: The Birth of a Trader. Early Life of Tipu Tip. In the bustling coastal city of Zanzibar in 1837, a boy was born who would later become one of the most influential figures in East and Central Africa. Ahmed bin Ibrahim, better known by the name Tipu Tip, entered a world dominated by the rhythms of trade, culture, and exploration. Zanzibar, at the time, was a thriving hub of commerce on the Indian Ocean. It connected Africa to Arabia, India, and beyond. The air was thick with the scent of cloves, spices, and the distant roar of the ocean, while markets overflowed with fabrics, ivory, and other precious goods. Tipu Tip was born into a wealthy and influential family of Omani Arab descent. His father, Ibrahim, was a prominent merchant, deeply involved in the trade networks that stretched into the heart of Africa. From a young age, Ahmed witnessed the movement of goods, ideas, and people across vast distances. The family home was a large, walled compound filled with the chatter of merchants, servants, and traders from distant lands. Children of wealthy families in Zanzibar were not only educated in Islamic studies and the Arabic language but were also trained to understand commerce, negotiation, and leadership. Tipu Tip absorbed these lessons like a sponge, showing an early aptitude for both strategy and human observation. Zanzibar in the mid-19th century was a city of contrasts. On one hand, it was a center of learning, culture, and economic opportunity. On the other, it was deeply tied to the slave trade and the exploitation of human labor. Tipu Tip's early exposure to these realities shaped his understanding of power and influence. While morally complex, his family's participation in these trades was considered a mark of wealth and status. He learned that control over resources, knowledge of the land, and alliances with powerful local leaders were essential to survival and success. By the age of 12, Tipu Tip had begun accompanying his father on small trading trips to nearby coastal towns. These journeys were not only practical exercises in commerce but also lessons in leadership and diplomacy. He observed how traders negotiated prices, resolved conflicts, and managed the logistics of moving goods over long distances. Even at this young age, Tipu Tip demonstrated a keen sense of observation, often noticing details that others overlooked: the quality of ivory tusks, the readiness of a caravan, or the mood of local chiefs. As he grew older, Tipu Tip's reputation within Zanzibar began to take shape. His ability to combine charisma with strategic thinking made him stand out among peers. He was not the strongest physically, but his mind was sharp, and his presence commanded respect. By his teenage years, he was already recognized as a promising young trader with the potential to expand his family's influence far beyond the city's port. Education in Zanzibar was not limited to the classroom. Tipu Tip also learned from stories passed down by merchants and travelers about distant lands, hidden trade routes, and powerful kingdoms inland. He dreamed of the jungles and rivers of Central Africa, where ivory, gold, and other treasures awaited. The tales of explorers and traders fascinated him, and he began to imagine leading his own caravans into the uncharted territories beyond the familiar coastlines. Despite his youth, Tipu Tip understood the importance of alliances. Zanzibar's politics were complex, involving not only Arab merchants but also African chiefs, Omani rulers, and European visitors. Building trust and respect with these groups would be essential for anyone hoping to operate successfully in both trade and governance. Tipu Tip began cultivating these relationships early, learning the subtle art of negotiation and diplomacy that would later define his career. By the time he reached his late teens, Tipu Tip was ready to step into a larger world. His early life had prepared him for the challenges ahead, the risks of long-distance trade, the moral complexities of the slave and ivory trades, and the unpredictable dynamics of power in East Africa. Little did anyone know, the boy who walked the streets of Zanzibar with curiosity and ambition would grow into a man whose name would be remembered across the continent. The story of Tipu Tip's rise had begun, shaped by the bustling ports of Zanzibar, the lessons of his family, and the dreams of distant lands filled with opportunity and danger. The stage was set for a journey that would take him deep into the heart of Africa, forging a legacy that was both celebrated and controversial, complex and unforgettable. Chapter 2: Into the Heart of Africa. Tipu Tip's Early Expeditions. By the early 1850s, Ahmed bin Ibrahim, now widely known as Tipu Tip, had grown from a curious and ambitious youth into a skilled young trader. His time in Zanzibar had given him the knowledge of commerce, diplomacy, and the complex social dynamics of coastal trade, but his eyes were set further inland. Tales of Central Africa's vast forests, mighty rivers, and abundant ivory had long captivated him. The promise of wealth, influence, and adventure called him beyond the familiar shores of Zanzibar. Tipu Tip's first expeditions were carefully planned. Unlike reckless adventurers, he understood that success required preparation, alliances, and a network of trusted people. He began by assembling caravans, groups of men trained in navigation, protection, and trade. These caravans were not small ventures. Some numbered hundreds of men, including porters, soldiers, and skilled negotiators. Each expedition carried goods to trade, tools, weapons, and supplies for months of travel. For Tipu Tip, organization was as important as courage, and he quickly earned a reputation for being meticulous and disciplined. The journey from Zanzibar to the heart of Africa was long and treacherous. Tipu Tip's caravans first traveled along the coastline and then through inland regions that were largely unknown to outsiders. Dense forests, swamps, and unpredictable rivers presented constant challenges. Disease, wildlife, and hostile encounters with local groups threatened every step of the journey. Yet Tipu Tip's leadership skills shone through. He learned to read the land, to understand local customs, and to navigate alliances with local chiefs. Diplomacy often proved more effective than violence, and Tipu Tip's ability to negotiate safe passage earned him respect across multiple regions. Tipu Tip's focus was primarily on ivory, one of the most valuable commodities of the 19th century. Elephants roamed the forests in vast numbers, and ivory tusks could be sold in Zanzibar for enormous profit. But collecting ivory was not simply a matter of hunting elephants. It required knowledge of the terrain, cooperation from local communities, and careful logistics to transport the heavy tusks hundreds of miles back to the coast. Tipu Tip's caravans became famous for their efficiency and scale, moving vast quantities of ivory while minimizing losses and maintaining discipline among the men. Alongside ivory, Tipu Tip became deeply involved in the slave trade, which, while morally troubling by modern standards, was a central part of commerce in East and Central Africa at the time. Captives were taken from inland regions and transported to coastal cities, including Zanzibar, where they worked on plantations or were sold to other markets. Tipu Tip navigated this grim aspect of trade with pragmatic efficiency. He maintained control over territories, enforced his authority with a combination of diplomacy and force, and ensured that his caravans could operate without interference from rival traders or local powers. Despite the hardships, Tipu Tip's expeditions brought him wealth and influence. His reputation grew as a man who could move freely across vast regions of Africa, negotiating alliances and commanding loyalty. By the late 1850s, he had established semi-permanent trading posts along key rivers and trade routes, creating a network that stretched from the coasts of Zanzibar deep into the Congo Basin. These outposts allowed him to maintain control over the flow of ivory and slaves while building relationships with local leaders who saw value in cooperating with a powerful and respected outsider. Tipu Tip's journeys also brought him into contact with European explorers and traders. Figures like Henry Morton Stanley, seeking knowledge and assistance in navigating the Congo's vast interior, recognized Tipu Tip's authority and expertise. Tipu Tip's role as a guide and negotiator during these encounters further cemented his status as a key figure in Central African trade. His ability to work with both African leaders and European visitors demonstrated a rare combination of cultural understanding, intelligence, and strategic foresight. Through these early expeditions, Tipu Tip laid the foundation for a trading empire that would dominate East and Central Africa for decades. His life in the forests and rivers of the interior required courage, adaptability, and unwavering determination. Every journey tested his leadership, and every successful return strengthened his influence. By mastering the complex interplay of commerce, diplomacy, and force, Tipu Tip became more than just a trader. He was emerging as a powerful figure whose name would be feared and respected across the continent. As the 1860s approached, Tipu Tip was no longer simply a young man from Zanzibar. He had become a recognized leader, a master of logistics and negotiation, and a figure whose ambitions extended beyond the coast. The heart of Africa was opening before him, offering opportunities, challenges, and a path toward historical significance. His story, however, was far from complete. The coming years would see Tipu Tip face even greater challenges, navigate shifting alliances, and expand his influence across lands that few outsiders had ever seen. Chapter 3: The Rise of a King, Tipu Tip in the Congo Basin. By the early 1860s, Ahmed bin Ibrahim, known throughout East Africa as Tipu Tip, had moved far beyond Zanzibar. The boy who once observed the bustling markets of the coastal city had transformed into a seasoned trader, explorer, and strategist. His expeditions into the interior of Africa had brought him wealth, influence, and a network of alliances stretching across thousands of miles. But it was in the Congo Basin, a land of dense forests, winding rivers, and powerful local kingdoms, that Tipu Tip would truly rise to prominence. The Congo Basin presented both immense opportunity and extreme danger. The region was home to numerous kingdoms, each with its own leaders, customs, and warriors. European powers were beginning to take notice of the interior, but knowledge of the land remained limited. Tipu Tip's experience, diplomacy, and carefully constructed networks gave him an advantage few could rival. He established trading posts along the Lualaba and Aruwimi rivers, positioning himself strategically to control key routes used for ivory and slaves. These posts were fortified and well organized, acting as centers of commerce and hubs of influence. Tipu Tip's power in the region was not based solely on wealth. He understood the importance of relationships. Local chiefs, recognizing the advantages of working with a powerful and respected outsider, often welcomed him. Tipu Tip offered protection, trade goods, and military support in exchange for loyalty and access to resources. He employed a mixture of diplomacy, negotiation, and selective force to maintain authority. This balance of respect and power allowed him to build a reputation as both a fair leader and a formidable figure. Ivory remained the cornerstone of Tipu Tip's empire. Elephants roamed the forests in vast numbers, and their tusks were highly prized on the coast and abroad. Tipu Tip organized large expeditions into the heart of the Congo, coordinating hundreds of men to collect, transport, and safeguard the ivory. The logistics were staggering. Caravans traveled hundreds of miles through challenging terrain, crossing rivers and swamps while avoiding rival traders and hostile communities. Tipu Tip's ability to manage these complex operations was unmatched, and it solidified his reputation as the most effective and powerful trader in Central Africa. Alongside ivory, the trade in enslaved people continued to be a grim but integral part of Tipu Tip's enterprise. Captives from inland communities were brought to Zanzibar and other coastal ports, fueling labor for plantations and enriching his network. While modern perspectives condemned this practice, in Tipu Tip's era it was a major component of regional commerce. His understanding of the social, political, and military dimensions of this trade allowed him to operate efficiently while navigating the ethical and practical challenges it presented. Tipu Tip's influence caught the attention of Europeans, particularly explorers and agents working in the Congo. Notable figures like Henry Morton Stanley encountered him during their expeditions and relied on his knowledge of the land, people, and logistics. Tipu Tip's ability to work with both African leaders and European visitors demonstrated his exceptional skill in negotiation and strategy. He could command respect across cultural divides, a talent that would prove crucial in the coming decades as European colonial ambitions intensified. By the late 1860s, Tipu Tip's name was synonymous with authority in the Congo Basin. His network of posts, caravans, and alliances allowed him to control large swaths of territory, effectively acting as a regional ruler. He collected taxes, mediated disputes, and enforced order in areas under his influence. Though he was not a king in the traditional sense, his power rivaled that of many local monarchs, and his reach extended from the rivers of the Congo to the shores of Zanzibar. Despite his growing influence, Tipu Tip faced constant challenges. Rival traders, hostile chiefs, and the ever-present threat of disease and natural hazards tested his leadership. Every expedition carried risks, and maintaining loyalty among hundreds of men required skill, discipline, and sometimes harsh measures. Yet Tipu Tip's resilience, intelligence, and adaptability allowed him to overcome these obstacles time and again, reinforcing his reputation as one of the most formidable figures in Central Africa. Tipu Tip's rise in the Congo Basin marked a turning point in his life. He was no longer simply a trader or caravan leader. He had become a dominant force in a region that few outsiders could navigate successfully. His influence, wealth, and strategic vision laid the foundation for the next phase of his life, governing territories, negotiating with European powers, and leaving a legacy that would endure long after his death. As the 1870s approached, Tipu Tip's story was far from over. The Congo Basin, with its untapped resources and complex political landscape, offered both opportunity and peril. Tipu Tip's ambition, skill, and determination would be tested like never before, setting the stage for a life that would become legendary and controversial across Africa and beyond. Chapter 4: Tipu Tip's Empire, Governance and Influence in the Congo. By the early 1870s, Ahmed bin Ibrahim, famously known as Tipu Tip, had transformed from a coastal trader into one of the most powerful figures in Central Africa. His expeditions into the Congo Basin had not only brought him immense wealth through ivory and the slave trade, but they had also established him as a respected leader across vast territories. Tipu Tip's influence now extended far beyond Zanzibar, touching the rivers, forests, and communities deep in the heart of Africa. Tipu Tip's success was built on a combination of strategic alliances, disciplined caravans, and a keen understanding of the political landscape. Local chiefs, recognizing his authority and the advantages of working with him, often invited him to mediate disputes or offer protection. Tipu Tip understood that power was not simply enforced through force. It was maintained through loyalty, respect, and a clear demonstration of competence. This approach allowed him to create a network of semi-autonomous territories under his influence, effectively operating as a regional governor. Central to Tipu Tip's empire was the control of trade routes. The Congo Basin's rivers were the lifelines of commerce, carrying ivory, slaves, and other goods to coastal ports. Tipu Tip established trading posts along these critical waterways, fortifying them to protect against rival traders and hostile groups. Each post functioned as a hub of administration and commerce, staffed by trusted lieutenants who reported directly to him. This system allowed Tipu Tip to maintain control over a region larger than many European colonies of the time. Ivory remained Tipu Tip's most valuable commodity. Elephants roamed the forests in large herds, and their tusks were highly prized in Zanzibar and international markets. Tipu Tip organized massive caravans, sometimes numbering hundreds of men, to collect, transport, and safeguard these tusks. The logistical challenges were immense. Rivers had to be navigated, forests crossed, and rival groups negotiated with or subdued. Yet Tipu Tip's meticulous planning and leadership ensured that his operations were efficient and profitable, solidifying his reputation as a master trader. Alongside ivory, the trade in enslaved people continued to play a central role in Tipu Tip's empire. While deeply troubling from a modern perspective, in the context of 19th-century East and Central Africa, it was an accepted and highly profitable part of regional commerce. Tipu Tip controlled routes through which captives were transported to Zanzibar and other coastal markets. He leveraged both negotiation and military power to maintain authority and protect his caravans, often acting as both a protector and enforcer within the territories he controlled. Tipu Tip's influence extended beyond commerce. He became a political figure capable of shaping regional power dynamics. Chiefs and communities looked to him not only for trade but for leadership and security. He mediated disputes, enforced local agreements, and sometimes intervened in conflicts to maintain stability. This combination of economic power and political authority elevated Tipu Tip above most traders of his era, making him a central figure in Central Africa. Interactions with European explorers and officials further enhanced Tipu Tip's stature. Figures like Henry Morton Stanley recognized his knowledge of the Congo and often relied on him for guidance. Tipu Tip demonstrated remarkable skill in navigating these encounters. He could maintain authority while cooperating with outsiders, ensuring that European ambitions did not undermine his control. This ability to balance local power with the demands of foreign explorers marked him as a sophisticated and strategic leader. Despite his power, Tipu Tip faced constant challenges. Rival traders sought to undermine his control, and local conflicts threatened his caravans. Disease and the harsh conditions of the Congo Basin tested both him and his men. Yet Tipu Tip's resilience, discipline, and tactical acumen allowed him to overcome these threats repeatedly. His leadership ensured that loyalty among his followers remained strong, even in the most dangerous conditions. By the mid-1870s, Tipu Tip's empire had reached its peak. He controlled key trade routes, maintained a network of fortified posts, and commanded loyalty across a vast region. His name was known throughout East and Central Africa, symbolizing both opportunity and power. Tipu Tip had become more than a trader. He was a regional authority, a master strategist, and a figure whose decisions could shape the fate of thousands. Tipu Tip's story at this stage reflects the complexities of 19th-century Africa. He was a man of ambition, skill, and vision, yet his wealth and influence were deeply entwined with practices like the slave trade that caused suffering. His rise highlights the interplay between commerce, diplomacy, and power in a rapidly changing world. The stage was set for the next phase of his life, where European colonial ambitions would challenge his authority and force him to navigate a new political landscape. Chapter 5: Tipu Tip and the European Encroachment, the Clash of Empires. By the late 1870s, Ahmed bin Ibrahim, widely known as Tipu Tip, had firmly established himself as a dominant force in Central Africa. His network of trading posts, caravans, and alliances stretched from the coastal markets of Zanzibar deep into the Congo Basin. Tipu Tip was no longer just a trader. He was a regional authority, a master strategist, and a figure whose decisions impacted countless communities. Yet this period also marked the beginning of a new challenge: the encroachment of European powers into Africa. Europeans had long been interested in Africa's wealth, but by the 1870s, ambitions intensified. Explorers, missionaries, and colonial agents ventured deeper into the continent, seeking resources, influence, and territorial claims. Figures like King Leopold II of Belgium were particularly focused on the Congo, viewing its rivers, forests, and natural wealth as prime targets for exploitation. Tipu Tip quickly recognized that European presence was both a threat and an opportunity, requiring careful navigation of diplomacy, power, and commerce. Tipu Tip's interactions with European explorers were complex. Henry Morton Stanley, for example, relied on Tipu Tip as a guide and intermediary during his expeditions through the Congo. Tipu Tip's knowledge of the rivers, forests, and local communities was invaluable to Europeans who lacked familiarity with the terrain. These encounters elevated Tipu Tip's profile internationally, demonstrating his ability to operate successfully across cultural and political boundaries. He negotiated agreements that benefited his trade while maintaining authority over his territories, a delicate balance that few could achieve. Despite these successes, European ambitions increasingly threatened Tipu Tip's autonomy. Colonial agents sought to assert control over trade routes, rivers, and resources that Tipu Tip had managed for decades. To protect his empire, he employed a combination of diplomacy and military readiness. He maintained well-trained forces capable of defending caravans and trading posts, while also fostering alliances with local chiefs who saw him as a stabilizing force in a period of growing uncertainty. Tipu Tip's commercial empire remained impressive. Ivory continued to be his primary commodity, transported via carefully organized caravans along the Congo's rivers. He also maintained control over the slave trade, a grim but integral part of the regional economy. These operations required precision, leadership, and negotiation skills, and Tipu Tip excelled in all three. His ability to manage such complex logistics further solidified his reputation as one of Africa's most influential leaders of the 19th century. During this period, Tipu Tip also engaged in governance on a larger scale. He acted as a mediator in disputes among African communities, enforced agreements, and collected tributes in the regions under his influence. European observers often noted his authority, describing him as a de facto ruler whose control rivaled that of formal monarchs. Tipu Tip's combination of political skill, commercial acumen, and strategic foresight made him a central figure in Central African society. Yet Tipu Tip's world was changing. European powers were not merely explorers, they were colonizers with long-term ambitions. King Leopold II's agents, under the banner of the Congo Free State, sought to claim territories that Tipu Tip controlled. These forces introduced new pressures, challenging the autonomy he had maintained for decades. Tipu Tip had to adapt quickly, negotiating treaties, offering cooperation, and in some cases resisting encroachment through force. The 1880s became a defining decade for Tipu Tip. He negotiated arrangements with the Congo Free State, serving as a governor of some regions along the eastern Congo. This role allowed him to maintain a degree of authority while accommodating European expansion. His knowledge of the land, local communities, and trade made him an indispensable intermediary. At the same time, Tipu Tip carefully safeguarded his caravans, plantations, and economic networks, ensuring that his influence remained significant despite the growing presence of Europeans. Tipu Tip's story during this period highlights the challenges faced by African leaders in the era of colonial expansion. He was a man navigating a complex web of power, balancing loyalty, trade, and diplomacy. His decisions affected the lives of thousands of people, and his ability to adapt to a changing world ensured that his legacy would endure. Tipu Tip remained a symbol of ambition, leadership, and the delicate interplay between African authority and European intrusion. By the end of the 1880s, Tipu Tip had established himself as a central figure in both African and European narratives. His empire was under pressure, but his adaptability, intelligence, and strategic vision allowed him to maintain influence in a rapidly changing environment. The stage was set for the next phase of his life, consolidating power, expanding governance, and leaving a lasting imprint on Central Africa's history. Chapter 6: Consolidation of Power, Tipu Tip's Governance and Legacy. By the 1890s, Ahmed bin Ibrahim, widely recognized as Tipu Tip, had reached the height of his influence in Central Africa. From a young boy in Zanzibar observing bustling markets and caravans, he had evolved into a formidable leader, trader, and regional authority. His empire spanned vast swaths of the Congo Basin, with trading posts, fortified settlements, and caravans operating under his command. Tipu Tip's remarkable combination of strategic thinking, diplomacy, and commercial acumen allowed him to consolidate power in ways few others could achieve during the era of European expansion. The core of Tipu Tip's influence lay in his control over trade routes and commodities. Ivory remained his most lucrative product. The Congo's forests teemed with elephants, and tusks were carefully harvested, transported, and shipped to coastal markets like Zanzibar, where they fetched high prices. Tipu Tip's caravans were legendary for their size and efficiency. Each expedition required meticulous planning, men were assigned specific roles, supplies had to be rationed, and alliances with local communities were carefully maintained to ensure safe passage. His expertise in logistics allowed him to manage a trade network that stretched thousands of miles and involved hundreds of men. Tipu Tip's influence was not limited to commerce. By the 1890s, he was recognized as a political and administrative authority in the territories under his control. He mediated disputes between local chiefs, maintained law and order, and collected tributes in exchange for protection and access to trade. In many ways, he operated like a governor, implementing systems of governance to maintain stability in a vast and diverse region. Tipu Tip's political acumen allowed him to navigate the complex interplay between African leaders, local communities, and increasingly assertive European powers. European colonial ambitions continued to shape the context in which Tipu Tip operated. King Leopold II's Congo Free State was expanding its reach, often exploiting local populations to extract resources. Tipu Tip negotiated with European authorities, leveraging his knowledge of the terrain, trade networks, and local politics to maintain autonomy. At times, he cooperated with colonial officials, serving as a liaison and even a regional administrator in certain districts. These arrangements allowed him to retain authority while accommodating the inevitable presence of European powers. Tipu Tip's ability to adapt to this changing environment was a hallmark of his leadership. Despite his political and commercial successes, Tipu Tip's empire relied heavily on the labor of enslaved people. Captives from inland communities were transported along his trade routes to coastal markets or used on plantations in Zanzibar. This aspect of his operations remains deeply controversial, and it highlights the moral complexities of 19th-century African trade networks. Tipu Tip's reliance on slave labor reflects both the norms of his era and the challenges of sustaining large-scale operations in remote regions. While he was respected for his leadership and strategy, his legacy is intertwined with practices that caused immense suffering. Tipu Tip's personal life also reflected his status and influence. He maintained a prominent household in Zanzibar, complete with estates and plantations, where his family and retainers lived. These properties were centers of commerce, administration, and social activity, linking the coast to his inland operations. He used these estates not only to manage economic interests but also to cultivate relationships with other influential families and political figures. Tipu Tip's ability to blend commerce, governance, and social influence contributed to his enduring prominence. By the mid-1890s, Tipu Tip's reputation had spread across East and Central Africa. African leaders, European explorers, and colonial officials all recognized him as a figure of authority, skill, and influence. He had survived decades of arduous expeditions, complex negotiations, and the ever-present threats of disease, rival traders, and hostile communities. His empire, though challenged by European expansion, remained a testament to his leadership, strategic insight, and adaptability. Tipu Tip's consolidation of power during this period also set the stage for his later years. As colonial authorities strengthened their control over Africa, Tipu Tip would face increasing pressure to negotiate his position, maintain influence, and protect his family and economic interests. His ability to navigate these challenges would be a defining feature of his later life and legacy. Ultimately, Chapter 6 highlights Tipu Tip as more than a trader. He was a strategist, governor, and influential figure in 19th-century Africa, balancing commerce, governance, and diplomacy. His consolidation of power demonstrates how African leaders could adapt to changing political and economic landscapes, even as European colonial forces began to reshape the continent. Tipu Tip's life at this stage underscores the complexity of his achievements, the moral ambiguities of his era, and the enduring impact of his actions on Central African history. Chapter 7: Challenges and Decline. Tipu Tip faces a changing Africa. By the turn of the 20th century, Ahmed bin Ibrahim, known across Africa as Tipu Tip, had lived a life few could imagine. From his beginnings in Zanzibar to his rise as a dominant trader and regional authority in the Congo Basin, Tipu Tip had built an empire of commerce, influence, and governance. Yet as the 1900s approached, the world around him began to change dramatically. European colonial powers were consolidating control over East and Central Africa, and Tipu Tip faced challenges that even his experience and skill could not fully mitigate. The greatest threat to Tipu Tip's authority came from the Congo Free State, under the control of King Leopold II of Belgium. Unlike earlier European explorers, Leopold's administration aimed to establish formal control over territory and resources, often with ruthless efficiency. The Free State's expansion directly threatened the trade networks, caravans, and outposts Tipu Tip had spent decades establishing. European forces were well armed and determined to enforce monopolies over ivory and other valuable commodities. This shift fundamentally altered the balance of power in the region. Tipu Tip's response combined diplomacy and pragmatism. He negotiated agreements with colonial authorities, leveraging his deep knowledge of the Congo's geography and his influence over local communities. In certain regions, he was appointed as a governor or intermediary, allowing him to maintain some authority while accommodating European demands. These negotiations were delicate, requiring Tipu Tip to balance loyalty to his people with the political realities imposed by colonial expansion. It was a period of careful maneuvering, where one misstep could result in the loss of influence, or even life. Despite these political pressures, Tipu Tip continued to manage his economic interests. Ivory trade remained central to his operations, and he maintained caravans to transport tusks from inland regions to coastal markets. However, the growing presence of European authorities and rival traders made these journeys more perilous. Tipu Tip had to reorganize routes, negotiate with colonial officials, and sometimes employ armed escorts to protect his caravans. His ability to adapt to this changing environment reflected his strategic acumen, though it was increasingly clear that the era of unfettered independence was ending. The human cost of Tipu Tip's empire also became more apparent during this period. His reliance on enslaved labor, a practice common in 19th-century East and Central Africa, faced growing scrutiny from missionaries, colonial administrators, and observers. While he had long used captives to work on caravans and plantations, European oversight and moral criticism forced changes in the management of labor. Tipu Tip had to adjust not only his trade practices but also the social structures that underpinned his empire, further complicating governance and commerce. Tipu Tip's personal life reflected both his success and the pressures of his later years. He maintained estates in Zanzibar, where his family and retainers resided, and these properties became centers of administration and social influence. Yet even in these strongholds, he faced uncertainty. The shifting political landscape, combined with internal family dynamics and rival ambitions, created an environment where Tipu Tip's authority required constant vigilance. His years of experience as a negotiator, strategist, and leader were tested more than ever. Interactions with European explorers and officials continued to shape Tipu Tip's later years. He served as a guide, mediator, and regional administrator, bridging the gap between African communities and colonial authorities. These roles allowed him to retain influence and safeguard aspects of his empire, but they also underscored the growing dominance of European powers. Tipu Tip's autonomy was now limited, and his decisions often involved compromise and careful negotiation rather than full authority. By the early 1900s, Tipu Tip's empire had begun to wane. The vast network of trade posts and caravans he had built over decades faced increasing pressure from European expansion, rival traders, and changing economic conditions. Disease, harsh terrain, and the natural challenges of the Congo Basin further strained operations. Yet even as his influence declined, Tipu Tip remained a respected figure, remembered for his leadership, strategic skill, and ability to navigate one of the most complex regions of Africa during a period of dramatic change. Tipu Tip's story in this period illustrates the broader transformation of Africa at the turn of the 20th century. Traditional leaders and traders, who once held significant autonomy, were increasingly confronted with colonial powers asserting control over land, labor, and resources. Tipu Tip's experience reflects both the resilience and vulnerability of African authority in the face of European expansion. He was a man of immense talent, yet history was shifting around him in ways that could not be fully controlled. As Tipu Tip approached the final years of his life, his legacy was clear. He had built an empire, navigated immense challenges, and left a mark on Central African history that would be remembered for generations. Yet his later years also highlighted the limits of individual power in an era of colonial dominance, setting the stage for the final chapter of his remarkable and complex life. Chapter 8: The Final Expeditions, Tipu Tip's Last Years in the Congo. As the 20th century dawned, Ahmed bin Ibrahim, better known as Tipu Tip, faced a rapidly changing Africa. Once an unrivaled trader and regional authority, he now navigated a continent increasingly dominated by European colonial powers. Yet even in the later years of his life, Tipu Tip remained a figure of influence, continuing to oversee caravans, manage trade, and guide local communities through turbulent times. These years reflected both his resilience and the realities of a world shifting beyond his control. By this stage, Tipu Tip's focus had shifted from expansion to consolidation. His extensive network of trade routes and posts in the Congo Basin was under pressure from Belgian colonial authorities and rival traders. European presence along key rivers and forests increasingly restricted the free movement of caravans, forcing Tipu Tip to adapt his strategies. Despite these challenges, he remained committed to maintaining his economic interests, particularly the ivory trade, which continued to be highly profitable. Tipu Tip's expeditions during this period were marked by careful planning and negotiation. He assembled small but efficient caravans, often relying on trusted lieutenants and local chiefs to oversee operations. Knowledge of the Congo's terrain, rivers, and forest pathways remained one of his greatest assets. Tipu Tip's ability to move through these regions, avoiding hostile groups while securing valuable commodities, reflected decades of experience and unparalleled expertise in Central African trade logistics. Diplomacy remained a central aspect of Tipu Tip's later years. He negotiated with local leaders, ensuring that villages and territories along trade routes remained cooperative. At the same time, Tipu Tip had to manage relationships with European colonial officials, who increasingly sought to impose control over the regions he had long influenced. These interactions were delicate, requiring a balance between maintaining autonomy and cooperating to preserve his position. Tipu Tip's skill in navigating these complex political landscapes reinforced his reputation as a shrewd and adaptable leader. Despite his advancing age, Tipu Tip continued to exert authority over his territories. He mediated disputes among local chiefs, enforced agreements, and maintained law and order in areas under his influence. His leadership was not only economic but also political, and his decisions had a direct impact on the lives of thousands. While the Congo Free State pressed its influence, Tipu Tip's authority remained respected among both African communities and European intermediaries, highlighting his enduring presence in a rapidly transforming region. The human dimension of Tipu Tip's later expeditions also reflected broader societal changes. The reliance on enslaved labor, a central component of his earlier operations, began to diminish under European scrutiny. Tipu Tip adapted by reorganizing labor systems, emphasizing cooperative arrangements with local communities where possible. These adjustments were essential to sustaining trade and governance, even as the social and moral landscape of Central Africa was being reshaped by colonial influence. Tipu Tip's personal life during these years was closely linked to his estates in Zanzibar. These properties served as administrative centers, family homes, and economic hubs. While he remained active in the Congo, he increasingly relied on trusted family members and lieutenants to oversee day-to-day operations. This delegation allowed him to maintain influence despite physical distance, demonstrating his ability to manage a complex and far-reaching network even in the twilight of his career. The later expeditions of Tipu Tip were also a period of reflection and legacy building. He was aware that the era of African traders and autonomous regional authorities was drawing to a close. European colonial powers were consolidating territories, and independent trade networks faced increasing restriction. Tipu Tip's focus shifted toward preserving what he had built, his family's estates, economic interests, and historical reputation. He became a mentor to younger leaders and traders, passing on the knowledge and strategies that had defined his life. By the time of his final journeys into the Congo Basin, Tipu Tip was a legendary figure. Stories of his caravans, negotiations, and leadership were told across East and Central Africa. Yet these years also underscored the limits of individual power against the backdrop of colonial expansion. Tipu Tip's influence, while significant, was now subject to external forces that could not be fully controlled, marking a poignant chapter in the story of one of Africa's most complex historical figures. Chapter 8 captures Tipu Tip's resilience, strategic adaptation, and efforts to consolidate his legacy, highlighting his final years of influence in the Congo Basin. His story during this period reflects the intersection of commerce, diplomacy, and colonial pressures, providing a nuanced perspective on 19th and early 20th century African history. Chapter 9: Tipu Tip's Last Challenges, Negotiating a Changing World. As the first decade of the 20th century approached, Ahmed bin Ibrahim, known as Tipu Tip, faced the final and most complex chapter of his life. From his early days in Zanzibar to his dominance in the Congo Basin, he had built an empire through trade, diplomacy, and strategic leadership. Yet the world around him was transforming rapidly. European colonial powers, particularly Belgium and Britain, were consolidating control over East and Central Africa. For Tipu Tip, maintaining influence required careful negotiation, strategic compromise, and adaptation to circumstances far beyond his control. The Congo Free State, under King Leopold II, had grown increasingly assertive. European agents patrolled the rivers and forests, enforcing monopolies over ivory, rubber, and other commodities. Tipu Tip's traditional trade routes and caravans were subject to these new restrictions, challenging the autonomy he had long enjoyed. While his reputation as a trader and regional authority remained strong, he could no longer operate with the same independence that had characterized his career. Maintaining influence required collaboration, not confrontation, with the expanding colonial structures. Tipu Tip's strategy during these years focused on diplomacy. He negotiated agreements with Belgian and other European officials to retain limited administrative authority over areas within the Congo. These arrangements allowed him to continue overseeing trade, mediate local disputes, and maintain law and order, even as the ultimate power shifted to colonial hands. Tipu Tip's knowledge of local communities, geography, and social dynamics made him an indispensable intermediary, a bridge between African populations and European authorities. His ability to negotiate under pressure highlighted his enduring intelligence and political skill. Despite the pressures of colonial expansion, Tipu Tip remained committed to managing his commercial empire. Ivory trading continued, albeit under the watchful eye of European agents. He reorganized caravans to comply with new regulations and relied increasingly on trusted lieutenants to supervise operations across vast distances. Tipu Tip's ability to adapt the logistics of his trade demonstrated a lifetime of experience in managing complex networks of commerce, even under restrictive circumstances. The human aspect of Tipu Tip's later years was deeply intertwined with the moral and social transformations taking place. The use of enslaved labor, once central to his operations, became increasingly scrutinized and restricted. Tipu Tip adapted by seeking cooperative arrangements with local communities and incorporating free labor where possible. While these changes represented a shift from earlier practices, they reflected Tipu Tip's pragmatism and his understanding that survival in a changing political landscape required flexibility. Tipu Tip's family and personal estates in Zanzibar provided stability amidst these challenges. His properties served as administrative centers, residences, and hubs for commerce. Family members and loyal lieutenants assumed greater responsibility for daily operations, allowing Tipu Tip to focus on strategic planning and negotiations with European officials. This delegation was essential as age and the demands of governance increasingly limited his direct involvement in every aspect of his empire. Interactions with European officials during this period were both challenging and instructive. Tipu Tip had to navigate cultural misunderstandings, competing interests, and the ambitions of foreign powers seeking to expand control. His ability to maintain authority while accommodating these pressures underscored his adaptability and foresight. Even as European dominance reshaped the political landscape, Tipu Tip retained a measure of respect and influence, demonstrating that his leadership skills remained relevant despite the changing world around him. By the early 1900s, Tipu Tip had become a symbol of both achievement and transition. His life represented the possibilities and limitations faced by African leaders during the era of colonial expansion. He had built a vast network of trade, commanded respect across cultures, and navigated decades of political, economic, and social challenges. Yet his autonomy was now curtailed, reflecting the broader transformation of African societies under European influence. Tipu Tip's final challenges highlight the intersection of commerce, diplomacy, and colonial pressures. They reveal a leader who adapted to changing circumstances, sought to protect his family and legacy, and negotiated a role in a world increasingly dominated by foreign powers. Even in his later years, Tipu Tip's decisions shaped the lives of thousands and left a lasting imprint on Central African history. As Tipu Tip's life approached its final phase, he remained a figure of resilience, intelligence, and influence. His legacy was secure in the memories of the people, the trade networks he had built, and the historical record of his leadership. Yet the changing political landscape foreshadowed the conclusion of his empire and the transition of Africa into a new era of colonial rule. Chapter 10: Legacy of Tipu Tip, the End of an Era. By the early 1900s, Ahmed bin Ibrahim, better known as Tipu Tip, had reached the twilight of a life defined by trade, exploration, and leadership. From the bustling streets of Zanzibar to the dense forests of the Congo Basin, Tipu Tip had built an empire that symbolized both the potential and the complexities of 19th-century African commerce. Yet as Europe's colonial powers tightened their grip on East and Central Africa, Tipu Tip faced the reality that his era of independent influence was drawing to a close. Tipu Tip spent his final years largely in Zanzibar, overseeing his family estates and clove plantations. These properties, which once relied heavily on enslaved labor, had been gradually restructured in response to European scrutiny and evolving moral standards. He managed his wealth, mediated family affairs, and maintained his status as one of the most prominent figures in the region. Even as he aged, Tipu Tip's reputation as a shrewd and respected leader remained intact among both African and Arab communities. Though he had retired from extensive exploration and long-distance caravans, Tipu Tip continued to serve as a mentor and advisor. Younger traders and local chiefs sought his guidance, learning from his decades of experience navigating the complex networks of commerce and diplomacy. His understanding of geography, local customs, and trade logistics became invaluable lessons for the next generation, ensuring that his knowledge would endure even as the political landscape transformed. Tipu Tip's interactions with European authorities during these years reflected both compromise and pragmatism. While his earlier independence had allowed him to expand his influence with minimal interference, the arrival of colonial administrations demanded negotiation and collaboration. Tipu Tip's ability to maintain a measure of authority despite these constraints highlighted his intelligence and adaptability. He became a bridge between African communities and European officials, using his experience to safeguard the interests of local populations and his own family holdings. Health and age eventually limited Tipu Tip's personal involvement in affairs. The physical demands of long expeditions and managing far-flung trade networks were no longer feasible. He relied increasingly on family members and trusted lieutenants to supervise operations in Zanzibar and the Congo Basin. Despite the reduced direct control, his strategic vision continued to shape the direction of his enterprises. His leadership style, combining authority, negotiation, and foresight, remained evident in the ongoing management of his properties and trade interests. Tipu Tip passed away in 1905 in Zanzibar, marking the end of a remarkable life that had spanned nearly 7 decades. His death symbolized more than the loss of an individual. It represented the close of an era when African traders and regional authorities wielded considerable power across vast territories. Tipu Tip's empire, once a symbol of mobility, influence, and wealth, had transitioned under the pressures of colonialism, reflecting broader historical shifts across the continent. Historical perspectives on Tipu Tip are complex. He is celebrated for his intelligence, leadership, and ability to navigate a challenging world, but he is also criticized for his deep involvement in the slave trade, which inflicted suffering on countless communities. This duality captures the moral and social contradictions of his time, a period when commerce, exploration, and survival were inseparable from the human costs of slavery and conquest. Despite the controversies, Tipu Tip's legacy is enduring. He left an indelible mark on Central African trade, East African political networks, and the historical record of 19th-century exploration. His interactions with European explorers, African chiefs, and local communities illustrate the interconnectedness of African and global history during a period of dramatic change. Stories of his caravans, leadership, and negotiations continue to be studied and recounted, providing insight into the complexities of African leadership and commerce under shifting historical forces. Tipu Tip's life also highlights the transition from autonomous African empires to the structured colonial territories imposed by European powers. His story serves as a lens through which historians and audiences can understand the challenges, strategies, and resilience of African leaders navigating the pressures of colonial expansion. It reminds us that history is neither simple nor one-sided. It is shaped by individuals like Tipu Tip, whose actions resonated across regions, cultures, and generations. As historians look back, Tipu Tip emerges as a figure of both admiration and caution. His skills in trade, negotiation, and leadership reflect remarkable adaptability and vision, while his involvement in the slave trade underscores the ethical complexities of his era. Ultimately, Tipu Tip's life is a testament to the dynamism of African history and the ways in which individual ambition intersects with broader historical transformations. Tipu Tip's story closes as a record of influence, ambition, and legacy, a man who rose from Zanzibar to command vast trade networks, navigate diplomacy across cultures, and leave a lasting imprint on Central and East Africa. His life embodies both the possibilities